Trump just dropped a bomb on America's closest ally, and this time it wasn't a tweet, a speech, or a diplomatic slight. This time it was economic warfare. Without warning, he doubled down on one of the most aggressive moves in modern trade history, raising steel and aluminum tariffs on Canadian imports to a staggering 50%. That one move has thrown Canada's economy into a tailspin. Factories are pausing production, tens of thousands of jobs are hanging in the balance, and prices across industries, from cars to construction, are beginning to surge. Canadian leaders are calling the fallout unrecoverable. But this isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Because Canada is no longer playing nice. It's retaliating, not just with counter tariffs, but with an economic revolution aimed at permanently cutting its reliance on the United States. And what comes next could fundamentally reshape the balance of power in North America. On June 4, 2025, President Donald Trump escalated his long-standing trade war with Canada to unprecedented levels. His administration announced that existing 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, already damaging, would now double to 50%. He claimed it was a move to protect American industry. But for Canada, it was seen as an act of aggression, economic sabotage by a supposed ally. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had just returned from Washington, where he attempted to ease tensions and protect trade relations. Instead, he found himself blindsided by the announcement. With over 75% of Canada's exports historically going to the United States, this tariff shockwave struck at the heart of the nation's economy. What was once the world's most integrated cross-border manufacturing relationship has now turned into a battleground. The consequences were immediate. Steel and aluminum prices surged. Canadian producers, who rely heavily on U.S. buyers, were thrown into panic. Catherine Cobden, head of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, didn't mince words. She called it catastrophic, warning of mass disruptions across a sector that employs more than 23,000 Canadians directly and supports over 100,000 more through supply chains. American supply chain experts quickly joined the outcry. Jeffrey Reitmer, a professor at Wayne State University and a veteran of the U.S. auto and manufacturing industry, warned that this would set off a ripple effect across the entire North American economy. With domestic supply falling short of demand, U.S. companies would be forced to pay premium prices for metals, either imported or domestically price-hiked. He described a chilling scenario. Smaller American manufacturers, already operating on razor-thin margins, suddenly slammed with enormous tariff bills due in just 7 to 10 days. Meanwhile, they wouldn't see customer payments for 30, 60, even 90 days. The result? An avalanche of bankruptcies, starting with Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers, the backbone of both the U.S. and Canadian manufacturing base. Reitmer went further, comparing the looming economic strain to the crash of 2008. It'll be 2007 to 2008 all over again, he warned. But this time, it's a trade policy creating the collapse. And the stats support his concern. A prior study found that for every one job created in the U.S. steel industry during Trump's 2018 tariff push, 75 jobs were lost in downstream industries, factories, auto plants, construction companies. This new round, far more severe, could easily eclipse that ratio. Canada is not sitting idly by. Prime Minister Carney's government immediately announced a counterstrike, starting with a new wave of reciprocal tariffs covering $30 billion worth of U.S. goods. But this isn't just about matching Trump's move. It's about redefining Canada's entire economic trajectory. Carney stood before the press and laid out an audacious plan to fast-track massive nation-building infrastructure projects, pipelines, rail corridors, nuclear reactors, Arctic outposts, all designed to reduce Canadian dependence on U.S. markets and solidify its independence. Legislation is already in motion to accelerate project approvals, cutting years off development timelines. In his words, "This meeting demonstrated how we can give ourselves far more than any foreign government can take away." And across party lines, the premiers of every Canadian province, even former critics of Carney, offered support. Alberta's Danielle Smith, who once lambasted federal overreach, now stands behind this economic insurgency. At the same time, a quiet rebellion is spreading beyond industry. Canadian consumer behavior is shifting. According to the latest Realtor.com data, online traffic from Canadian homebuyers searching U.S. real estate dropped sharply in the first quarter of 2025. In Florida's retirement haven of Naples, interest fell by 13.5 points. Canadian tourism to the U.S. also declined by over 20%. The message is clear: ordinary Canadians are voting with their wallets. This isn't Trump's first trade war. In 2018, he slapped tariffs on steel and aluminum, triggering a tit-for-tat response from Canada and other allies. That standoff ended in a tense renegotiation of NAFTA, reborn as the USMCA. Now, that very agreement is up for review again next year. But this time, Trump's tactics are more aggressive and more personal. He's not just targeting tariffs, he's floating rhetoric about annexing Canada, calling it America's 51st state, and suggesting Canada should pay for missile defense or lose its sovereignty altogether. The line between economic pressure and political provocation is blurring fast. So where does this lead? First, layoffs. The Canadian Steel Producers Association has already reported a 30% drop in steel shipments. That figure is expected to plunge further, meaning thousands of jobs could disappear within months. Second, a U.S. supply chain crisis. Without Canadian metals, American automakers and builders face skyrocketing input costs. Prices on cars, appliances, and homes could surge just as inflation becomes a growing concern. Third, a broader trade realignment. Canada is now courting Europe, Japan, and emerging markets in Latin America and Asia. Infrastructure in the Arctic is being ramped up, not just to secure resources, but to assert sovereignty in a region increasingly contested by Russia, China, and yes, the United States. And perhaps most dangerously for the US, the long-standing assumption that Canada will always be its junior partner is rapidly unraveling. Trade talks are ongoing, but trust is crumbling. New alliances may soon take shape, ones that don't include Washington at all. This is no longer just a tariff dispute. It's an inflection point. Trump's tariff gamble might be aimed at protecting American industry, but the fallout threatens to paralyze it. Canada is retaliating not just with taxes, but with transformation. Its factories, borders, and people are mobilizing around a new mission: national resilience and total economic independence. The U.S. built decades of prosperity on stable trade with its northern neighbor. But now, Trump is pulling the thread, and the entire fabric could unravel. So the question becomes, will this economic war force Canada to break free from the US orbit, or will both nations collapse into mutual decline? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of the next move in this global chessboard, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The fallout is far from over.